Up next on Radio Dayz The Podcast.
Stoney and Wojo.
So there you.
Yeah, I thought that
there's
was
a little bit of the Stoney.
I wrote that the night before Wojo started. I was on my way on my way to a Sunday night gig at the Bird of Paradise in Ann Arbor as a musician, and I'm thinking like a combination of Barney Miller and I'm thinking boom 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 boom.
Yes.
Greetings and salutations, and welcome to Radio Dayz, a podcast radio program that delves into the world of terrestrial radio. It's DJs and on-air personality, and you, all fans of radio as a medium. Here's your host, Ron.
Hello and welcome to Radio Dayz The Podcast, where we not only offer this audio podcast for your enjoyment, but now you can watch this show via YouTube and as well at ronrobinsstudios.com. This week, I welcome radio personality and imaging guru, Mr. Don Swindell. You may not know that name, but trust me when I tell you, you know his voice. We're going to have Don on here in a little bit. Today's episode is brought to you by Radio Dayz, the docuseries, and the Linda Rea Team, real estate professionals. They're the best at what they do, gang. This first episode, in fact, is sponsored by the Linda Rea Team. To tell us more about how her team can help you in this uncertain time, here is Linda herself. Linda, hey, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great, Ron. Listen, I want to share with you, too, how much my clients and following is enjoying your podcast as well. And to talk about real estate. Yeah, it is. And to talk about real estate today, too, is while things are changing and there are certain ways that we can get an interest rate for 4 to 5% for our buyers. So don't be afraid of giving us a call. Very simple procedure. And I also wanted to mention, Ron, how many to the public that how many of you know that we have specialty shops in the Linda Rea Team, such as a senior shop department. And I head up the senior department as well as the luxury department. And we have professionals in each one of them to make sure that your needs are met. So if the seniors out there are thinking about making a move, whether it's to a warmer climate, across the nation, across town, give me a call, 248-709-3786. We have some very good programs in place to make sure that your move is smooth. And I also have a networking team across the nation. So if you're moving to another state closer to the children, let me know. We have professional vetted people that's on our team of networking that can help you, and they have as much experience as I do here in the state of Michigan. So you can reach me at 248-709-3786. I hope to hear from you. And
people can also hear you from you. You're all accessible on social media. Where can people find you online?
Oh, just Google Linda Rea, for heaven's sake, and she's everywhere out there. Truly, we're on all social media, and Googling us and our website is just a fantastic piece of work to help people find the homes that they're looking for. And you can find all the latest listings right on the page one on page one. It's really easy, and that's LindaReaTeam.com.
Linda, you're the best. Keep rocking and rolling. We'll talk to you next week. Thanks, Linda.
All right, thanks, son. Bye-bye.
So my guest today has been heard on the air at WJZZ here in Detroit, WLS in Chicago, a creative production director for CBS Radio. This man has been in the business for 30-plus years. He's also worked with the legendary radio broadcaster Pual Harvey, which I'm going to ask him about today as well. There we go. And did I mention, as a production director at 1130 WDFN, he is also responsible for producing such classic songs like, I don't know, let's say this one. What do you think of this?
Have I told you lately that you're roadkill?
Oh, God.
Have I told you your blood clot will soon spill? Slice you down with slashes, fill your face with gashes, deliver pain. It's what I do.
Yeah, the famous "We Hate Claude Lemieux" years.
Yeah, I won't play too much more of that.
No,
but I did want to play that.
Best vocal ability there. No.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the voice you just heard. Welcome to the podcast, Mr. Don Swindell. Don, how are you?
For an old guy, I'm still above ground, so that's a good thing.
So what do you think when you look back and hearing that little clip of one of the songs that you created? That's your voice. You produced that.
Well, I think
you created so much more content. You made a huge impact on sports fans here in Detroit in the late '90s and beyond. Talk about, if you would, what kind of comes to your mind when you hear that little clip?
Well, that was just what was the. It was one of the easy ones where I just would throw a vocal over a karaoke tape. There were other ones that I had to play I had to do the arrangement, play all the instruments, and they were much more layered. So that's coming from the technical aspect.
Right.
But that reminds me a whole lot of, well, those are the glory years for the Wings, and the Chris Draper thing with Claude Lemieux, and
I wanted to ask you specifically because I don't know if anybody's ever asked you this, but whose voices were those as the background singers?
Which ones?
Like when you come to the chorus, you can hear some guys joining together in a chorus to sing the ooze.
That's all me.
Oh, all of that was you?
Yeah, I went out of my way to make them all sound a little different from each other and to all be a certain amount of out of tune.
Wow, you did. You did a good job.
I intentionally recorded them out of tune.
Now, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves before we get too far into your career at WDFN because that's just one aspect of your career. I want to start at the beginning, Don. When and how did you get your first job in radio? Where was your first job in radio?
Riff.
Talk about that experience. How did that opportunity?
Well, I was the night before that because I was working as a musician. So, I had there used to be this place called DB's, which is up on the top of the Hyatt Regency in Dearborn. Well, it wasn't on the top. It was actually lower floor. We're going way back to the early 70s. And I had just done a whole week of playing, I was in the band for the Patti Page show that week. I don't know if you remember her. How much is that doggy in the window? Going back in the 50s.
I know that.
Yeah.
I know that. Okay.
Yeah, well, they would bring in different acts, so I got the chance to play with a lot of different acts over the years. I got to play with Lou Rawls for a while. I got to, working like a professional musician.
With Lou Rawls, you'll never find.
Yeah, well, I worked with him up on Mackinac, so. But he was.
Tell
by
me
the
about
way,
well, you can't just bring up Lou Rawls and expect me not to ask you about Lou Rawls. What was that like?
He was what a wonderful guy. Because they would ask him about his monitors while we're doing the sound check, and he would say things like, "Man, I don't need it. Don't ask me about no monitors. I mean, I work with Count Basie, man. If you complained to the Count about how you couldn't hear yourself, he would say." Well, hear this and play a chorus of "There'll Be Some Changes Made."
Wow.
No, he was just funny. He was just a nice person, easy to work. I was just I was in maybe a 15, 20 piece band. Back then, when you work those kind of shows, you would go in and do a rehearsal, but you wouldn't rehearse the whole book. You would find a couple charts that might give certain sections trouble. Well, take it from bar 18, we'll go to 35 and move on. So you really never played the whole show until you're actually playing the show. But he was one of the easiest people to work with. And I only did a show with him.
So while you were at WRF, how did your role expand, if it did at all? Talk about that first gig. That's a pretty impressive first job is WRF.
Where do you find out how I got it?
Talk about that.
Well, I was rarely up. I was living musician's hours.
Right.
And like I said, I just come off the Patti Page show, which is just doing a week with Patti Page in Dearborn. Nothing special, You had to be good enough to play it. It was one of the rare times I was up in the morning, and there was this girl I was hanging with that I ended up marrying later, and found myself in a house of pancakes. So we're goofing around because she had a good sense of humor, and I'm throwing a few voices out there, and come to find out the guy in the next booth was a guy named Mike Collins, who was the morning guy at Riff at the time. So we bumped into each other on the way out of the original House of Pancakes in Southfield. We started talking, and he said, well, look, before I go on Monday, you want to write me a few lines and come up with a bit or something? Let's see what happens. Right. And so I got up, got the morning paper around 5 or 5:30, and 6 o'clock I started calling him with bit ideas, and I did a couple of voice bits on the air, and it went really well. And next thing you know, by the end of the week, I'm producing the morning show at Riff. It was total accident. I bumped into a guy in a house of pancakes, and I still talk to him all the time.
And so what year was that?
1977.
Who was the program director at Riff at that time?
I believe it was Tom Bender.
Tom Bender. All right.
Well, Tom was...
So how long did... Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to ask you, how long were you at Riff, and how did your role expand if it did?
Well, it just got... I just did more and more stuff. It sort of took off from the beginning and kind of stayed there. But after, but I was not full-time.
Right.
In fact, most of my freight was being carried by Mike Collins. And after a few months, because they were union, which means, I'm not going to do a show on my own if I can't touch a turntable. I'm not going to do any production if I can't touch a tape machine.
Right.
So this job came up in Flint, and, Michael told me about it. And said, well, you need some interview practice. You're probably not going to get the job, but I suggest you just go up there and see what happens. So I go up there, and it was kind of like the scene from one of the scenes from Private Parts, where general manager and the program director, first they put me in a studio, because I went up there to be part of a morning team. I did not go up there to be a production guy.
Okay.
And, well, why don't you go in the production studio? And they gave me a couple pieces of copy to do whatever. And I turned one of them into a 2-voice thing, but I didn't have time to do any editing. So I just made sure that I had this way of doing 2 voices where if you're going to do, without using tricks, if you're going to be 2 different people, always make sure you take your breaths in the middle of one voice, not at the end, so you don't hear breathing in between the shifts. So I did one quick like that. I did a straight spot, and he had a demo of me doing a bunch of voices, a couple comedy bits or something. And I'm sitting in the lobby thinking, well, okay, well, that's cool. And all of a sudden I hear this pounding. This guy is storming out of the station, slamming the door. Before they even asked me if I even wanted the job, they fired their production guy and hired me and told me after he left.
Wow.
It sounds like I'm making it up, but, radio stories, there's tons of those.
Right. You're exactly right.
It was kind of like a combination carnival and zoo back then, but radio was fun back then because you didn't have all these corporate owners. Everybody was looking for, it was like a creative wonderland for middle-class guys.
Well, how is it working? How different was it working in Flint than it was in Detroit, if at all?
Well, it was wilder there because it was more, wasn't, Riff was ABC.
Right.
And I trying to remember what the name of the it was GenCom, Genesee Com. Well, back then, most of your stations only, if you had 30 stations, you had 28 owners. Back then, if you were a corporation, you could only own 7 AM, 7 FMs, 7 TV stations. But if you owned a newspaper, you had to give one of the 3 up, and only one of each in any market. So you can only be involved in 7 markets, and you can only have what I just said. Well, to keep me.
There was a limit.
Well, yeah, but it also meant that most owners did not have the money to compete with ABC and the network-owned stations, so they had to find creative ways of getting listeners. So if I made sure I did every creative thing I could, and there were times where my presence might have given them an edge in some way, shape, or form.
Sure.
But
So go ahead.
No, it just it was just much more fun. You look forward to going to work every day because we didn't know what we were going to do from day to day. That's what made WDFN later down the road so special, because it was almost like a 1970s radio station.
Right. And I want to ask you about that. Before I get that, because I mentioned at the top, I do have to ask you about it, because we might have to jump around here a little bit, because your career has been pretty interesting. But how did you come to work with the legendary Pual Harvey, and what did you do? Did you work for him? Did you work with him? What was that dynamic like?
I did
I did
a couple little things for him. What was more important there was somehow we developed this relationship. Of course, we worked out of the same. There was an area where one side there was a common control room, and one side was his studio, the other side was my studio, the production studio for WDAI, which was WLS FM at the time. And he first knew about me. I'd been there about a week, and he always liked to do the price of gold every day.
Right.
And he was a stickler for details. And he once quoted, "The price of gold as being $44 an ounce." And I said, "No, that's not right." So I'm talking to his producer, Bob Benningoff, and I said, "I think he got the price of gold wrong." He said, "Well, you better go tell him. He's Pual Harvey. He's like, the most expensive guy in radio." And
what are you going to say to Pual Harvey?
Well, I walked up to him. I said, "Mr. Harvey, I think you may have quoted the price of gold incorrectly. I believe you just said $44 an ounce." And because it was 444, obviously. But he ran, he's not that old. He's younger than I am now. Made a mad dash down the hall, demanded that his in-house producer roll back the tape. And lo and behold, I was right. So he went into like hyper gear and said, "We've got to send retractions all the way down the line." And back then, down the line was half the stations in America, Armed Forces Radio around the world. He was there were times that he would put these little goof tunes on that people would send in, but he needed to edit them down, but he wouldn't just accept any edit. It's got to sound like it never was edited. And I guess I was the only guy in the building knew how to do that, especially back in the days when you splice, you're using a razor blade, and
It wasn't like it is now, where it's a snip.
No, it actually was a splice with tape and everything, And
so let me ask you this before we move on from Pual Harvey. What do you think go ahead.
Let's just say it got to a point where I was called into a sales meeting one day, and I thought I was in trouble or something, because I was the production director for that whole station. But the sales manager says, "Now let me get this straight. We're all scared to death he's going to jump to Mutual, which would be a major disaster for ABC. So we show up every day, and we keep our hair short, and we wear 3-piece suits, and we shave. And you show up in jeans, a sports coat, a beard, long hair, and you're the one he likes?" Hey, look, no accounting for taste.
Such is radio.
No.
Such is radio.
Well, Paul was not politically my cup of tea, but, back then a conservative wasn't. It's not like dealing with George Santos or Donald Trump. Back then, the man had so much integrity. He wouldn't put anything on the air unless he had 3 confirmed sources.
Well, and to me, what made him special is that he would tell you the story, and then he would reveal who he's talking about.
So the rest of the story.
And it made it fascinating. So even if it wasn't something that you cared about, you listened because he was just a great storyteller.
Well,
I think that's what
I don't know what it was about. I don't know why he liked me so much. I remember one thing. I remember, mind you, I'm like 24, 25 years old at this point. My father comes into town. He's visiting the station. Next thing you know, I'm walking down the hall. In front of me is Paul with his arm around my dad, because I think he sensed that my parents weren't too happy about me dropping out of law school. And he was talking about me like I was the greatest thing to hit radio since the loudspeaker. Now, nobody asked him to do that.
That's high praise.
What I'm saying is, but nobody asked him to do it. He was just more recently, that would be like somebody like me becoming friends with Sean Hannity, But Paul had integrity. Paul was a wonderful person.
Let me ask you this, Don. What did you learn from that experience? Because you had to learn something from the man.
Oh, my Lord. The most professional radio person that you could possibly meet in your life. He even did all those cornball warm-ups first thing in the morning. He was never late. Everything he said had integrity. You may not agree with his opinion at times, but you can't disagree with the story because he never messed with the story.
Right.
He always told the truth. And, and he did it in a way so you knew the difference between opinion and fact.
And what I found so fascinating about the whole Paul Harvey experience is because it, as the years progressed, and you can attest to this because you were right in the middle of it, you would have very specialized radio stations, and Paul Harvey might just get played on one or two radio stations on an AM dial. But in the 60s, 70s, and even in the 80s, it wasn't uncommon for a rock station in the middle of the the hour, just to stop what they were doing and playing Paul Harvey.
Well, yeah, but
it was everywhere.
But it was also, these stations were in an affiliate relationship. So they weren't supposed to run him on more than one station in a market because people had to pay for those rights.
Sure.
But it seemed like it because every market ran him somewhere. In fact, remember back in the days when ABC, they used to put reverb behind him.
Yeah.
Well, they put reverb behind everything. And so that's,
sure.
The model.
That's what makes radio radio.
The 1960s synthesizer was a reverb unit. The spring reverb that used to be in the back of people's cars where every time they hit a bump, it would go.
Yeah. So you mentioned a little bit ago in 1994, you got hired in at WDFN in Detroit. I think it was one of the first sports talk stations to give some, energy back into the AM dial, because by that time, AM was almost dead. If it wasn't for Rush Limbaugh, it would have been. But sports radio was new and it was hot. But talk about how you came to work at DFN.
I took a wrong turn in Cincinnati back around 1989.
Uh-oh.
No,
say more things.
Well, it cost me a marriage and blah blah blah, we'll leave the lawsuit out of it. But
probably a good idea.
No, it wasn't that big of a deal. But I never intended to be in radio for more than a few months. What happened was I went to a house of pancakes, and once I got into Riff and then quick stop in Flint for 11 months and then straight to Chicago, I got this big office. I'm talking to Paul Harvey every day. I'm on the air at an ABC-owned station in Chicago, also doing, I did about 12 hours on the air solo every week. And I'm thinking, well, that might be a career here. But, about in 1989, I took a break. And I'm doing this, something else that Dorian Passer talked me into doing, just to keep my fingers in radio a little bit. This is after I left JZZ. And so I'm doing a couple weekend shifts on WEMU, the public station in Ypsilanti. Now, it didn't pay me enough to cover the gas money, but at least I got to play around,
Sure.
Well, there was one particular day where my second wife decided she's going bye-bye. And here I am, 35 miles away from where we lived, and nobody else is at the station on a Saturday morning. And so I'm on the phone going, "You're going to what? You're doing it? Excuse me." That was just John Coltrane with Jimmy Garrison, along with Tommy Flanagan. And
that's funny.
And
that's how it was. That's how it was.
Well, portions of the preceding hour were made possible by a grant from School Kids Records on East Liberty in Ann Arbor. And then, I put another, and now here's Gary Burton's latest. Boom. "You're what? Boom, click." And then like 5 minutes later, I get a call. There's a great saxophone player from Detroit that died, unfortunately, about 15 years ago, named Larry Nazaro. who was one of the Funk Brothers, by the way.
Yes.
And he needed a trumpet player up on Mackinac. Well, normally I wouldn't be caught dead on in that place. But because it was Larry, I said, well, at least it's going to be musical. And then, so I went from being out of work radio, doing part-time radio in the Detroit area to calling my butt up to Mackinac Island and being a full-time musician. But I thought it was going to be like almost a death sentence, but it was probably the best thing I ever did.
So how long were you at Mackinac?
4 years.
Wow. What was that? Tell me about that. That had to be an experience.
Oh, it was quite an experience. Musically, it was wonderful. And, you know, after I left, I'm doing a quick forward here. After I left Mackinac, same time that Larry left, I ended up the last 12, 13 years of his life, we played together constantly. He ended up being my best friend and a phenomenal musician, and no musician is going to tell you otherwise. So actually that helped develop most of my musical talent came from that constant playing I did.
At Mackinac?
Yeah, but while I was in Mackinac, because I wasn't showing up in a day job every day, I always felt guilty, like I was out of work, and I worked my ass off up there. But
yeah, I want to ask you about that. What was it like? What was a day in the life of Don Swindell at Mackinac? What was that like?
Well, I ended up after the first year, I ended up becoming the assistant music director because I knew how to handle schedules. You know, okay. Larry was the star, and I was the guy that I was like the floor boss. You know, and also I played a lot, but not that easy to keep track of 20 different musicians on an island before the time of cell phones, and an island
that's challenging,
and an island that didn't have any cars.
Yeah, there you go.
You know, I mean, so I was constantly I got really good at bicycle riding.
Yeah, I'm sure you did.
You know, I've had this crazy life. It's like if normally especially now that I'm living up in Davison, if I talk about this stuff, people think I'm making it up. Because it's very bizarre. It's like because I never had straight gay gigs.
Well, and that's why I love doing this podcast, Don, is because everybody comes from different walks of life and they have different experiences in this great occupation that is broadcasting, and talk about, I mean, just doing a bunch of different things related to radio and otherwise. But so let's segue into the next thing. How do we get from Mackinac to WDFN in 94? How does that happen?
Well, we'll rewind a bit to how I got into WJZZ.
Okay, yes. You have the floor.
Because I had left LSFM, then I went down for a couple of years and did a morning show for 98 Rock in Tampa.
Oh, yes.
That was
Tampa,
wild
Florida.
And crazy and wonderful. But I came back and I was, you know, when you don't have a lot of money, you don't wait around for the perfect job. You take the next thing that's up, you know, and it's not always the greatest national boost to your career. But I was playing in an early version of the Sun Messengers. And we got an award at the Metro, what they called it back then, was the Metro Times Music Awards. State Theater or something like that, you know.
Something like that, yeah.
And Dorian Passer, who at that time was the program director of WJZZ, was the guy giving out the awards. So on the way, as we're walking off the stage, I look at Dorian and I said, look, you know, I've done some radio, and I made sure I dropped the Chicago credential, you know.
Sure.
And he said, well, come see me on Monday. And then he hired me to work at WJZZ. And that's where the connection to Art Regner began.
There it is.
You know, and
he's like Kevin Bacon, but Detroit radio, like the 6 degrees of Art Regner.
Oh, there's more than 6 degrees of Art Regner.
All right, so go on.
16 below, yeah. So they were starting this station, an all sports station, on an AM signal that wasn't the greatest signal in the world, but none of the AM signals outside of JR and J were that great. But Dorian kept telling him that the most creative person he knew was me. So
that's high praise.
And I'm in between gigs, because I got out of 89, 90, 91, 92. In 93, I was still playing a lot of jazz gigs, but, without the Grand Hotel money, they weren't covering the nut, But,
sure.
But I think I was still getting unemployment, which is kind of like seasonal work because you work every single day, up on Mackinac.
Sure.
So, you go home, you sleep for a couple of months, and you draw unemployment. That's the seasonal work. That's what happens. So I get this call from this guy named Art Regner saying they're going to start this sports talk station. Now, I'm used to getting calls from people that may not be telling me the whole truth. And but he said, well, he wanted to meet me down at W4. Well, if you want to meet me there, I know that's legitimate. It was owned by the Disney family, Shamrock Broadcasting back then.
Okay.
It wasn't Disney Inc. It was, the family owned. Very nice people to work for, by the way. And Dorian knew that I wanted to be back on the air. I didn't want to go back into doing production because I kind of looked at it as a thankless job. And, but okay, Dorian says I should do it. So, I'm not going to say no. And so they tell you should do an audition tape that, make it 5 minutes max, put little clips in it. Well, I do more than one or two things. I do a ton of,
Right,
and,
right. There's a lot to it. There is a lot to it.
Well, so I just said, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I gave him a 2-hour audition tape. And it had a lot of long bits on it. And because I figured, well, if you hire me, you know what you're getting, so you can't argue. And if you don't hire me, I don't have to do the damn job. So I figured
for you,
I figured it was a win-win. I also figured I wasn't going to get the job. Well, I was wrong. I got the job. So, which was right, actually, because it was the best things that ever happened to me. It's almost another one of those lucky kind of things. I get a job at JZZ because I got an award. Well, an award that was part of a bigger band. And because of that, a little 2-sentence discussion gets me into JZZ, and years later, all of a sudden, I'm up for DFN, but not through any kind of industry thing because Dorian knows Art. Dorian told Art that I'm automatic. By the way, Art was doing part-time at WLLZ at the time.
Yeah.
And the original plan was once we got the station on the air, which turned out to be July 11th, was it 93 or 94? You think I remember that?
94.
Yeah. They were going to hire him full-time. He was going to be like our promotions guy. And he died on that week, like 2 days before we went on the air. But without knowing Dorian, I wouldn't have known Art. Without knowing the both of them, I never would have ended up at WDFN. And I'm so glad I took that job because DFN was a lot of fun.
Well, I don't want to get ahead of myself because I want to ask you, because here's the thing, and I've always been curious about this. I mean, you had Stoney and Wojo, you had, Jamie and Greg, Rob Parker and the Man with Mark Wilson. Well,
the original thing was, the original lineup.
Yes, it was, yeah.
Butch Stearns and Larry Sorensen.
Yeah.
The Morning Battery, I think they call themselves. Anyway, go ahead.
No, but then, but your voice is probably the most distinguishable because of the imaging, because you were going out for all of the shows. Your voice was being, but yet no one probably knew your name.
I don't remember. In fact, when I did the tunes, nobody knew that I was Stoney and Wojo. Boom, boom,
you know what? I'm gonna cut you off right there because we have the real thing. Okay, hold on.
Stoney and Wojo. Stoney and Wojo sounds like the name of an old TV cop show. Stoney and Wojo.
So there you.
Yeah, I thought that
there's
was
a little bit of the story.
I wrote that the night before Wojo started. I was on my way I was on my way to a Sunday night gig at the Bird of Paradise in Ann Arbor as a musician, and I'm thinking like a combination of Barney Miller and I'm thinking
yes.
And
that's what it made me think of. I used to love Barney Miller, by the way. Great reference.
Well, they just brought back Night Court, so
yeah,
it's not going to be the same, but it's okay.
Right.
But
no, it was it was catchy.
Well,
it was just.
And I wrote it in the middle of a 30-minute drive. And the next morning I got up, went to work, and I think it took me to put the voices together and all that, maybe 20 minutes. And I figured
So it's all you? Is it all you?
Oh,
or
no,
did you get
that's
help?
all me.
Everything on there is your voice.
Yeah. Well, I'm a musician. I know how to do that stuff. It's not that big of a deal for me.
Don.
A lot of people in radio claim they're musicians and they can hack their way through Gloria. You know what I mean? No, I was a real musician. That's what I went to college for.
Well, as long as we're talking about that, what was your most favorite parody that you did? Because you did so many of them.
Well, my own. We have our personal things, and it's not. And I understand it's probably not everybody's favorite. It just, one of those things that because I had to do all the instruments and the arrangements, and it had so many different elements to it, and I did it when I had 102 fever. Was I was homesick, and they decided that it was probably Greg and Rona, and they wanted to do a Hanukkah Bush tune.
Yeah.
And it's probably my favorite, personally. But if you want to talk about the hits, the ones that were kind of like hits, well, of course, there's the Pizza Man.
Yeah.
And the background singers were Greg's wife, Nikki. She was working at Dunkel School in Farmington Hills, and we needed a chorus of young boys, but slightly older girls were the same. The vocals fit. Yeah. So I had all these kids singing the choruses of the Pizza Man. And
the Pizza Man can, man.
The Pizza Man can. The Pizza Man can.
That's brilliant.
Well, and Jamie had a lot to do with that one, I think. God, I miss him.
Yeah.
He had a very interesting, never mind. It's a marvelous, dry sense of humor.
Yeah, no, he became the face of you brought him up. I can't help. I mean, he's been gone for a couple of years now, but what do you remember most about Jamie at the Fan?
Well, now this is that.
What you can share with us. I don't want to put you on the spot.
I've been misinterpreted because I've always said that Jamie was just getting going when he left us. Freeing up his sense of humor, he used to avoid that, and it took him but as he got older, he kept advancing into it, and he had this most wonderful individualized sense of humor that I just wish he would have been able to stick around for another 30 years. He was in a lot of ways, he was a master of what he did, but he was an unfinished masterpiece.
Yeah, and he was just by all accounts, he was salt of the earth. He was very much like Ernie Harwell.
Well, yeah,
angelic,
and also he was a magnificent father. I mean, that means to me more than anything.
You brought Jamie, and I think you mentioned him earlier, the Jamie and Greg show. If Stoney and Wojo was probably the most popular program on that station, if you think about the longevity of it, Jamie and Greg kind of set the table for them in the sense that it was a little bit interesting. But I want to mention to Greg Henson specifically. What was it like to work with him? Because he on the air, he's supposed to be a radio personality, but he's also the PD.
Well,
and he's pissing a lot of people off. What was that like?
Okay, what are our parameters here as far as
If you could be as honest if you want, or as curtailed as you want.
It's okay to have a few cuss words, right?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
Greg, he's a great guy, but he understood he was what I would call the station dick. In other words, because Greg was so outrageous,
Yeah.
he gave everybody else permission to be whoever else they wanted to be, because you only need one, so that you can get, because, WJR never had a station dick.
Right.
The closest thing Riff ever had was Arthur, and he wasn't a dick, And
he was Spicoli.
Well, I mean, because even JJ and the Bruiser, they didn't go and they didn't,
Right.
Greg understood that station had some balls.
Right.
And he was the guy that had the guts to provide them. Not to mention for one thing, when it came to like any feedback, he lived off of that, He didn't give a crap about what you thought, but he was good at it.
Yeah.
And I know that was hard for Jamie, because there were times working with Greg is not an easy thing to do, for anybody. Greg's been a great friend of mine for years and years and years.
Now, I want to ask you specifically about DFN, because it happened in the mid 90s. The Tigers and the Pistons aren't very good at the time. Although the Pistons, I think they were rocking.
Oh, by the way, how were the Lions doing back then?
Oh,
never mind.
I was going to say they had Barry, so that was an attraction.
Yeah.
But I've always attained that, and here's to my point. I've always attained that the Red Wings and their peak and what they did really kind of put us trampoline on WDFN. How important was the success of the Red Wings and Art Regner's relationship with the Red Wings
I'll tell you something.
help that station?
Well, the thing that helped me with Art was because, even when I was a kid, I would much rather have a Stanley Cup than a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
I'm a hockey fan. I've always been a hockey fan. You
might be in minority, as weird as that sounds.
Well, no, just for some reason, I just fell in love with the Red Wings when I was a kid.
Sure.
Well, Joe Louis wasn't that far away from the old WDFN garage.
Yeah.
You've heard about the facilities or lack thereof.
Right. From all accounts, it was very much like a college dorm.
Well, yeah, there was one time because our ventilation wasn't very good. We only had one in probably violated all sorts of health department things. We only had one door. In and out was one door. In fact, one night I got kind of stuck there for a couple hours because the people from the factory down the street, sort of some kind of club. I can't remember what we called them back then. There was a car parked up right to the door, and I couldn't get out of the building.
Oh no!
Well, not a big deal. I knew it was going to be okay. I just had to sit there till the bar closed. There's so many asides to DFN conversations. You got to understand, and I hope I don't embarrass Art, but let's just say that we had one restroom, one small unisex restroom with no real ventilation.
Okay.
And it got so bad one day where I'll never forget this. The man of quotable quotes. He just yelled out to everybody, "Why can't everybody just go poo-poo at home?"
I don't know why that would embarrass him, Don.
No. I was one of my favorite DFN quotes of all time.
And there was a lot of them. That's a bold statement.
Well, it was true.
That's a bold statement.
Because people would go in there and leave like this. It was like a gas chamber sometimes.
In fear that I might get a different response, what is the most outrageous thing that you saw in your 8 years at WDFN?
We weren't really that outrageous. Man,
a lot of different personalities, a lot of different.
Well, yeah, but you know something? When we started that station, now I'm going to get the heart and soul of this. It's the closest thing, and all the time I spend in radio, to a family in radio. That is a really rare thing. We built that station together. We weren't supposed to succeed. We were the last ditch effort to save a dying wavelength.
Yeah.
That's the reason that, well, the major reason that we were one of the first stations to use computerized stuff was it was cheaper. Because you could totally computerize your station for the price of one cart machine. You know, we weren't supposed to succeed. We were like a dice toss.
Well, let me ask you this before we move on from the fan. What is the coolest thing that you got to do because that you worked there?
Oh my Lord!
Because I'm sure there's a long list.
I make that list a lot shorter. Anything I wanted. It's like I would come. I mean, it's like there was one night. Well, no, this is actually a CBS story, but well, I'll give you it's the same kind of thing. I'm about to go home and finally get some rest. Maybe it's a Friday night, and all of a sudden. The reason I'm bringing this up as a CBS thing, because I just don't have a specific from DFN, although there were many of them, where you remember when we were up against the Anaheim Ducks and we ran into Jaguar.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm about to go home and get some sleep, and all of a sudden in my head I'm going, I'm just Jaguar and goal. Just a gigolo. And then I go, oh God, I'm going to be up till 6 a.m. doing this one. You know. But
when inspiration hits, right?
Well, but the thing was, it's the only place I ever worked was, and Greg was really into this. It's like, if I had like 45 commercials to do, because I was writing, voicing, and producing all the commercials too. But if I came up with a good tune, he'd go, look, give them to the production assistant, go home and do the tune. The tune was always a priority. And the thing that made these tunes burn into people was Greg would, as a program director, would tell them, you played the first few days, we'd put it on the air. Mandatory, you got to play this tune once an hour. You know, because when they were later after I left DFN, one of the reasons I didn't do too many tunes after that was the philosophy was different. So if they weren't talking about the exact subject and the exact people and didn't have enough time left in their pre-scripted stuff, I could never get it on the air. So at that point, why should I spend 3 days putting this together and it might get one play? But Greg understood that. Greg was like, and it was good for me. It was good for the station. It was good for, it was, and if I did something really controversial with the potential, at least the potential of being controversial, like the Pizza Man.
Yeah.
You produce it you put it on the air last thing on Friday and let it run all weekend, which means you've at least got that much time before you have to deal with the cease and desist.
From the lawyers, right?
Yeah, but I mean, the thing was,
that's smart.
But that stuff put us on the map.
Yeah.
You know, I used to do this.
Yeah.
I used to do this William Clay Ford bit. I'd always call him Baldo, you know, and
didn't you get in trouble with with Rona on one of those?
No, I got in trouble with William Clay Ford.
Oh, okay.
Which is kind of funny.
About that.
Which is kind of funny because the same weekend I was playing in the Lions band.
Oh, you got to share this. Share that story with us.
No, it was. Well, what was really strange was, and Jamie got a real kick out of this, you know, because he would say, "Do they have any idea who you are?" because Clay, because I did a William Clay Ford bit that could be a little boisterous, you know.
Sure. Right.
There was, for a few years, I was the voice that you heard when you came through the door.
Right.
You know, welcome to Ford Field. You know,
right.
Hey, if you want to go smoke some pot, it's behind 257. And, you can't, please leave any AR-15s at the door and, whatever. I can't remember the script, obviously. But, he told me, he said, he couldn't believe, he said, do they have any idea who you are? Because you're like the voice of the stadium.
Did they know? That's a good question.
What?
Did they know?
No.
Wow.
The crazy thing is the day that article came out. Are you there? I just lost you.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, that's okay. The day that the Free Press, I think, put in like a quarter page about how William Clay Ford wanted me to get fired.
Right.
That was the day that I was picking up a new Ford on the A plan. And I have no idea this is in the paper. I had no idea that anything was going on because I had taken a couple of days off.
Right.
And so I show up and all the salespeople are waiting for me. And they're joking around like, hey, we better process you before they cancel your loan. I'm the guy that pissed the big boss off,
Right.
And,
right.
But before that point, and it's like, okay. And my sister calls me up and she goes, oh my God, I hope you're not getting fired and blah, blah, blah. Don't worry about it. There's what happens in real life. And,
right.
The crazy thing is that thing really helped put us on the map even more.
It sure did. Did.
But meanwhile, my sister's freaking out, and I'm saying, look, I got back to the station, and yeah, I got punished really bad. I got an extra week off with pay.
Oh my gosh, that's horrible.
And they greeted me with a cake and balloons. I said, look, as far as you know, this never happened. I was punished. I feel shame, like Slapshot.
I feel shame. Go through the box. Feel shame.
Feel shame. But to be honest, there were a couple of times we really thought they were going to shut off the lights.
Well, moving on to the next half, I have to ask you. In 2002, Don, you became assistant PD and creative director for CBS Radio Detroit. Talk about that transition.
Well, that was I was basically Henson's assistant. I'll tell you something. People told me you'll never be able to work with Rich Homburg. Oh my God, you can't be working for Rich. And you know something? The guy practically doubled my salary.
So it was a good experience for you.
Never reneged on anything. And to this day is one of my favorite people and a friend of mine. I don't have trouble with difficult people because at least difficult people tell you what they want.
Yeah.
Same thing with Tom Bigby. I love that man and I miss him. We lost him a couple of years ago.
Yeah. I want to take this opportunity. You brought up. So you went from WDFN to 97.1 before it became the Ticket. And you came over with Greg.
No. I was when they were still Team 1270 on the AM dial.
Yeah.
But at that.
So how was that different from what you were doing at the Fan? How did the job change when you crossed the street?
A lot more money, a lot less work.
Say more things.
Well, but the thing was, I was doing the tunes in the beginning. That's where the Just Jagarin Goal came from. It's just that there was a mindset over there in the beginning when they were just Team 1270 where they were so dedicated to everything being so just X's and O's and sports and sports and sports, and it wasn't really working for them, okay? And we weren't exactly guy talk, but I always describe DFN as it's like a radio version of Playboy party jokes. It's like I called it, actually what I used to call it was, hold on. Sometimes the old brain needs a second to catch up. Progressive sports talk.
Yeah.
For men with sports. Progressive talk for men with sports as the excuse.
Yes.
In other words,
yes.
we're basically into sports, but
that's not all we talk about.
We better have something else to talk about, because when you're dealing with, when you go through a cycle where all your local teams are losing in a homer's town, you better have something happy to talk about.
Yes.
I mean, you can't talk about, what happened last night? Well, all our teams lost.
Yeah.
You can't just piss and moan about another loss all the time. So you got to find fun things to do. We did a lot of fun things.
So you worked less, got paid more. Was it more fun than DFN was?
Well, nothing will ever be as much fun as the early days of DFN were. The problem was, I'm working like 12, 14-hour days sometimes and still playing gigs. And I was getting people calling me, collection agencies.
Yeah.
So I needed some money.
Right. Need to get paid.
Well, yeah. Sorry, and also I understood at that point in time that CBS.
Well, let me ask you this: was there more pressure to produce at CBS than fan, or was there less pressure?
Really. No, about the same. Well, no, I mean, I don't need any pressure. I put enough on myself. But what I'm saying is, by that time, one of the main reasons I left. Greg had already decided to leave.
Yeah.
But Greg was under a no-compete for 6 months.
Right. I remember hearing that.
And I never signed one.
Good for you.
Well, that's why I showed up before he did. That's the only thing. It's just, it just got to a point where, now they knew. By this time, we're Clear Channel.
Sure.
And they knew what I was worth. Because once they realized they didn't realize I had just signed with CBS. They had this big corporate meeting down in Tampa somewhere. Oh, we got to find some way to get him back. Oh my God. It was like, I go. And I was a little ticked off at that point too with Clear Channel, because there was a really primo gig, sports radio in Los Angeles. Place where I could go out there and do some voices, maybe get some cartoon work, maybe actually get some money in the bank. And I got word from somebody, I can't tell you who it was, but because they asked him at a national convention, well, we really need a creative guy for sports radio in Los Angeles. And he said, I know this guy in Detroit. And before he could finish that, he told me, he said, Swindell, no. Corporate says he's too valuable to Detroit. We can't have him. No, interesting. But I never got a raise. They just thought they honestly believed that I would stay there underpaid forever because I just want to be creative.
Right.
Well, no, I'm going to be. No, my creative spot is when I'm playing gigs. This is my day job. It's creative. It wasn't just. Well, I turned down Boston because I knew that with sports, man, if you don't know what's going on locally, you're wasting your time. And I knew that my connection was always going to be Detroit.
Yeah.
Because I lived through all that stuff.
Now, I want to move forward a little bit. In 2008, you became imaging director for CBS Radio. What was this gig and how did this happen?
Well, I may have set a record, okay? I got, we could use the word fired, but they never use that word.
Furloughed's another one of my favorites.
Four times. It got to the point that when I finally got let go for good, a couple months later, I get an apology. Well, not an apology. I get an interesting text from Terry Foster. And he said, I'm sorry I didn't contact you this time. He said, because every time they let you go, they bring you back 2 weeks later. And it's like, I honestly didn't believe they were letting you really go.
Right.
But I actually got canned 4 times during those years.
Wow.
And most of the time it was for like a week or two.
And then they would call you back.
It was a budget
else.
cut. Well, they thought they could get by without me. Maybe they could. In a lot of ways they could, but not in every way they could.
Not when they call you back.
Well, then we had different program directors that people will blame for letting me go. And one in particular is a guy named Dan Zampillo, who actually, and the same thing with Jimmy Powers. None of those guys wanted me out of there. But I was working for, it's all budgetary stuff. And when I was finally let go, it was right before CBS sold off their radio properties.
Okay.
See, that's where we got to be careful, because
that's fair enough. We'll move on,
nobody wants to hear this stuff.
I do want to ask you about because I don't know how long you worked there, but I know it's on your resume. It's a legendary radio station in the history of radio. WWJ. What was your stop?
Well, WWJ was 20 feet away from the ticket. We're in the same building. Okay.
But still, I mean,
I did a lot of things for them, and one of the greatest things that happened was I got really close to Sonny Elliott. He was a friend of mine. Another
legendary broadcaster. Well, talk about that.
Well, for one thing, I don't know. I automatically took to Sonny, and I know a lot about broadcast history. In fact, one day he said, "How old are you? Are you you don't look like you're 90 years old. How do you know all this stuff?" Well, I was one of those kids that respected my elders, that wanted to learn from people like him.
Yeah.
He's the reason I married my third wife.
Well, that's memorable. Well, that's memorable,
because there was a particular Super Bowl Sunday. And, at that point, Sonny couldn't drink. Excuse me, I got to get this back. Earbuds fall out every now and then. She was the healthcare person for Sonny's wife, Annette. I had stayed away from Sonny for a couple of weeks because I had some kind of flu or something. I just wanted to make sure I didn't give him anything, because he was really getting up there. And I was supposed to go to this really great Super Bowl party, and I get a call from Sonny. He goes, "You want to come over and watch Super Bowl?" And I'm thinking, I'm not going to say no to Sonny Elliott.
Sure.
He was a neighbor, but it wasn't such a unique thing. We were around each other a lot. No, I just had a connection with him, and it was, he became one of my best friends. I spent several years, every holiday we would spend over at Sonny's house, Sonny's condo, which is a couple miles from where I was. And he was just a wonderful, wonderful person. I mean, you're talking about.
Well, let me ask you this. I want to interject about Sonny Elliott. Like, you obviously were a fan of his before you met him, and then you became a friend.
Oh, he was probably. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No,
I was just going to ask you, what made him special? I mean, what?
I don't know. I mean, he's probably on the television the day my mother brought me home from being born. I mean.
Yeah, he was the weatherman.
Well, I did, the first time I ever did like a performance in public doing voices was high school. Fortson High School, Dearborn, whatever. And one of my bits was Sonny. And, the guy was extremely talented.
Right.
If you look back at the 60s, probably the highest rated local host in the history of Detroit television. But you're also talking about a man whose real name was Marvin Elliott Schlossberg, who was shot down in World War II as a bomber pilot, and as a Jewish man, survived a year and a half in a German prisoner of war camp. And the first thing he had to do after he got out of that camp was march down the road with the Allies and free a death camp. You know, I mean, and here's a guy that never complained, that never had any signs of PTSD, that always was positive, but he wasn't just a goofball. He was a brilliant person, and so was his wife, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, how can you not grow up respecting this man?
Yeah. That's cool that you got to work with him at WJ. Such a legendary radio station.
Yes.
Well, okay, how did you, I know you ended up in Texas. What took you to Texas? Talk about your travels
well,
there.
no. I never was in Texas.
But didn't you do some work in Texas?
Oh, yeah, but I did all that work from Farmington Hills.
Oh, well.
I did it from the studio.
Another magic of broadcasting.
I won an Emmy in Cincinnati from for writing, for feature writing. In fact, one year I beat out that year I think I beat out Jerry Springer, but that was before he was. That was back when he was an anchorman. But
right.
But I did that over the phone. I mean, I was using the phone.
That was a. Go ahead.
I was using the phone like we use the internet today. You know, I mean, it's just that I did a lot of long distance stuff, and the reason here's what happened during one of those, the third or third of the times that they supposedly let me go. Well, Tom Bigby just replaced the 20 hours I lost and hooked me because he was from Dallas, and by that time he was more involved in Dallas. Then all of a sudden, I'm doing all of his imaging for his sports station in Dallas, and I'm doing all the stuff for the Dallas Cowboys, and all that stuff was submitted directly to the Cowboys, and they never complained. And and I also did the Texas Rangers. Well, I was still doing Lions, Tigers, Red Wings, Pistons.
Wow!
And I was also
full
I was also the booth announcer for U of M. Hey, look, I don't want this to look like a boast fest. These were all just jobs I did.
For sure, yeah, but they were great experiences. I'm
well,
sure.
the stuff that kind of put me on the map with DFN was doing the DFN squares and being Keith Richards,
right.
And you know, and I would weave. Bob Wanowski, Wojo. He understood the key to radio. He still does. It's not to be great. I mean, as far as like an elocutionist and all this, it's to be likable.
Right.
And so what would happen, I would do a promo that had nothing to do with Stoney and Wojo. And in the middle of this promo, I would always, if I could, I would drop in a little side bit with Wojo, so that right. I would try to find ways to blend everybody together.
Right.
You know, to make it one. A station has a personality. I mean, we have personalities, but my job, at least with DFN, was to be the station personality.
And your voice was the voice of DFN, even if people didn't know your name. You had an amazing job there. Pretty cool.
Well, yeah, but a lot of it had to do with the fact that I was a musician. And
well, that's what I want to ask you about, because as I got a couple more questions, one or two more questions, but I want to ask you. I know you're a musician, Don, and that's where your passion is, and your radio's always been your day job. What are you most proud of? But looking back on your career in broadcasting, what's some of the things you're most proud of?
Well, this is not going to totally fit it, but it gives me a little breathing space right now. Because I survived. I don't know. It was I think a lot of it had to do with well, it initially was that I got so far so fast with no training.
Yeah.
But that's also made me believe it was going to keep going, you know.
Right.
I mean, there was a point where I was hired to be a writer on the new Fox late night show the night that Joan Rivers left.
Yeah.
And that fell apart in 3 days because they decided to keep the old producer. But I mean, there's all these close calls I've had.
Right.
But hell, I could have gotten the job and screwed it up, you know. No, the things I'm most proud of is, things like this where people actually look back at, because, you know, I've been so many parts of so many different forms of radio and so many different points of music that I feel like there are times you feel like, you know, was it worth it all to scatter yourself so much? And it's nice to be noticed that there was an end result to that. But,
yeah,
I don't know. I mean,
it sounds like you just enjoyed the journey.
Well, that's what it is. And I'm not done yet, if I can live, you know.
Right.
I mean,
right.
I've got a few health problems right now, but I'm working through them. No, it's like, I'm a little upset about how media has become with all the corporate stuff. But I am so glad. One of the greatest things about it being as old as I am is that I got to experience radio when it was like fun. And all that stuff was supposedly over, and then came DFN. And because I remember during one of our corporate takeovers, I think I can't remember which one it was. There's so many corporate names. That all of their numbers said, shut down the signal, turn them off. But then they got into the books and they saw that even though at that point in time we didn't have great ratings, what we had was a very interesting statistic in old Arbitron days called TSL, time spent listening. We had a very large cult following. And there was a point in time, I remember Pete Kowalski was we're back to DFN now. Pete Kowalski was the sales manager. And we didn't qualify for a lot of national beer buys, except the local distributors got in the way and said, look, screw all of that. We want to be on DFN because every time we do something with DFN, tons of people show up. And there was back to the new owners. I can't remember which generation of new owners it was, but it was. They finally came to the conclusion is we don't know how this works, but we've looked at the books and it's working. So let's just leave those guys over in the garage alone. And let them do what they do, because if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Right.
Because, you know, nobody expected us to succeed.
And you did.
Well, not me. I mean, you know,
the station.
We all got together when we started off. We put the office furniture together. We did it all as a team. We were one big family. And even though we've gone on to other stations and done other things, and, well, I went out to the pasture, but there's a bond that we have that I've never felt, and I've been in radio a long time. I've never felt with anybody else. We're like a family.
Well, I've talked to a couple of those guys, Don, and they all speak highly of you.
Well, you know, I mean, I love them all, man. I mean, I will never be closer to people in radio.
It was a moment in time. And as you know, as you mentioned, and we've talked about over the course of this program, Don, is radio was different then than it is now. But here we are. One final question. In your opinion, what is the state of radio as a medium in 2023 from your purview?
I hope I'm wrong. Okay. You're talking about terrestrial radio, the kind
Yes,
you pick up through your...
Yes, sir.
I think corporate radio missed a golden opportunity. The only way you're going to keep terrestrial radio, which means you're going to have to deal with commercials. Because, for an extra $11 a month, I can get YouTube radio and hear endless tunes that I can pretty much program for myself and no commercials. The only thing they had going for them was localization. If I'm driving through Detroit and I turn on a local station, then I can hear all the stuff that's going on in Detroit. I can, and also, and a lot of, they spend more money on salespeople and they keep cutting their budgets and they don't. You got to have personalities. You got to have people that have a local personality. Radio would be a great place where you could just turn it on and let it roll and be a Detroiter.
Right.
And that's satellite ain't going to do that for you. It's not going to do it.
True story.
They missed the boat. They doubled down on music radio. Well, people and forgot, unfortunately what happened to them was underneath it all, people found better places to get their music.
Yeah. It can't be just about the music anymore.
No, that's why the ticket works.
Yeah.
Because you don't go there for the music. You put up with the commercials. But at least,
and I've noticed more people are listening now that the Lions are doing well.
Well, yeah,
again,
but what it is, it's like, you're talking to people that are Detroiters like you, and you're part of your family. And at least when you're in this bubble, like I am in this Camry, at least when you're all together, we're all on the same team.
Yeah.
All of a sudden you take the whole world and you shrink it down into where you live. And that's the one thing that all this making everything sound the same around the country doesn't work.
Yeah. And Detroit's always been special that way.
Well, Detroit is... Detroit is...
Go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah. No, you go.
No, Detroit has always been a monstrous media market because the media is our culture here.
Yeah.
It's all about sports more than anything.
Yeah.
That's why I've always felt like if I'm not in a market that has a major sports team, I'm failing.
Yeah. Well, and that's why it was so popular here in Detroit. Don, I want to thank you for coming on, being a guest on today's Radio Dayz The Podcast. Thank you so much, Don. I appreciate you.
Well, thank you very much.
This segment has been brought to you by Radio Dayz The Docu-Series, a documentary series about the history of radio. Radio Dayz 101 Years of Radio, coming very soon, will chronicle the history of radio from the first celebrities to be created by the medium of radio through Top 40, payola, all the way up to current-day radio programming. To find out more about this movie that is slated for release, as I mentioned, in a couple of months, go to ronrobinsonstudios.com. And you can hear the story from those who lived it. Thanks again to Don, and thank you for tuning into Radio Dayz The Podcast. Today's show is produced by Ron Robinson Studios. If you need professional marketing videos, professional photography, headshots, maybe you need drone video, head over to ronrobinsonstudios.com. You can also hear previous episodes of Radio Dayz The Podcast there as well. Until next time.
You can't go. All the plants are going to die.